All right, Chapter 18, Life in Industrial America. Really, what most of this chapter is about is focusing on the idea of urbanization. As the United States becomes increasingly industrialized at the beginning of the 20th century, we're also creating larger cities because we need to have a concentrated labor force in order for industrialization to operate. At the same time, that very technology that industrialization is creating is making the environment for urbanization to accelerate. In other words, for the cities to become bigger and have more concentrations of population. A lot of the beginning of chapter 18 focuses on that. If you're looking through the American Yawp, a lot of the first pages are focusing on things like the development of better plumbing systems to create more access to water. Avoidance of diseases thanks to better sanitation. We're seeing steel creating skyscrapers, all of this kind of stuff, making urbanization a reality. But again, a lot of what we want to look at is how that's affecting the American people and the American culture. And what we're seeing is that the working class of the United States is shifting. There's a lot more struggle as these cities are growing so fast. There's issues with overcrowding within them. At the same time, the kind of people that are moving into these cities are increasingly from an immigrant labor force. We've seen that in chapter 16. We'll see it again in chapter 19. We've seen that 25 million immigrants have entered the United States between 1865 and 1915, and they're going to be mainly within these urban centers. Not only is that changing the American economy, it's totally changing what we understand as American society and the American culture. As we've already seen, and you probably picked up on in your own life, not everybody in the United States likes it when there's a tremendous amount of change. So there's going to be this backlash continue to grow with nativism, which we've already approached and will continue to approach basically on and off for the rest of our class. Meanwhile, at the end of the chapter, we start looking at the rural Americans and how it's shifting their lives, in particular in the South, and in particular focusing on the increased disenfranchisement of the African American population. As the labor force grows in the North and in the South, we see that those people who are in positions of authority are trying to find ways to manipulate it in order to maintain their position and status as the elite. Unfortunately, this not only has an economic and political impact, but it has a huge and tremendous social impact. And really the last slide or so in the slideshow and the end of the chapter is focusing tremendously on that and how it's changing and developing American culture, not always in what we would see as a positive way, and in so many ways that we are still dealing with today. So, what do you have to get done? Of course, we want to watch the slideshow. We want to make sure we're doing our reading. But we also have a couple of exercises for Chapter 18, including one where we're looking at this idea of exactly what we were just talking about. This concept of as this mass workforce continues to grow, how the elite are trying to utilize it to maintain their positions of authority. And it's very different in the North and the South between the immigrant population and the African American population and how that labor force is being treated. This one exercise, looking at this idea of the two regions and how they treat their labor force differently, is something that you might find interesting because it's going to have these huge long-term impacts as we see the corrupt political machines in the North figuring out how to manipulate the vote for their own advantage. And then in the South, where we see that instead the elite are figuring out how to disenfranchise those people they think are going to be making decisions and have influence that will work away from their authority. So that's the first exercise. There's a video about the tenement movement in the North that you should look at for it. And it also links in with your reflection piece, which is asking you to look at how this increased disenfranchisement politically and economically in the South is also being shaped and coincidentally shaping American cultural identity with the advent of your first full-length feature film, The Birth of a Nation, and how that is playing into reinforcing a lot of these stereotypes that are going to be negative and really kind of how we as Americans today need to look at this and understand it so that we can understand how a lot of these things continue to perpetuate themselves in our society today. At the same time, do not forget that this is a big week. And in our big weeks, that's when all of our checklist is due. In other words, all the reflection pieces have had their due date so far, but if you haven't been able to get to them, this is your last chance to turn those in for at least some late credit. Also, this week, we know that on Thursday, we have got our quiz for chapter 16 through 18 due. Remember, you get 2 chances. I only count the highest attempt, so make sure you take 1 attempt, and then look back at it. You can look back at your old quizzes by going into the assessment tab and clicking on the down arrow next to the quiz, and it'll let you look at your old attempts so that you can take a second attempt and try to do even better. It's all about always trying to improve. That's what we're here for. The other thing is the document discussion, looking at Lucy Parsons, which is taking these 2 ideas, the idea of the importance of the labor movement in the United States and the continued fight of women and having their rights recognized within the United States, and this era when women don't even have the right to vote yet. That's coming in another chapter. Another thing that I do want to just mention to you, don't forget, it's not due this week, but next week, you do have your first take-home essay due. Okay, that essay, again, looking at this idea of the costs of industrialization. We all know that industrialization is making the United States an economic superpower, but we also know that comes at a cost, both short-term and long-term. While it's not due this week, once you get that quiz through for chapter 16 through 18 done, once you get all the discussions done, it's something you want to start thinking about so you're ready to have it done by its due date next Thursday. So, with that said, remember, you can click on it right now. You can click on the due date box, and you can actually look at the rubric for it, and you can be putting it together. If you have any questions, remember to send me an email. Remember that we'll be talking about this essay within the chat sessions, and you can get a good head start on it so you're ready to go next week. Until then, have a great rest of this week and make sure you get all that work done.